everybody! This time I talk about developing your artistic style, and I also show some glimpses of my online art classes. And I think that if you are looking for your artistic style, you find this approach a little bit different than maybe what you've heard or what you've tried. Maybe. Let's see. Many times I hear people saying that they want to find their style, but I think that the whole question is kind of wrong, that many times you don't want to find your style, you want to find your visual vocabulary. And there's a difference between these two words. When style is kind of quality word, you use your inner critic for that. Is this style the quality I want? But vocabulary is more about quantity. What kind of different kind of brush strokes or shapes or lines can I draw? And what are all the things that I can express with them? So in this video, I talk especially about the visual vocabulary. And I could also claim that you can't find your style without growing your vocabulary, without finding the vocabulary that you want to use. Because, you know, if your vocabulary is very narrow, if you only use one or two shapes, then it's really difficult to be unique. It's really difficult to find the connection with those shapes, and it's really difficult to get really creative. When I started, I mainly drew circles. Can you believe that? Circle after a circle. And my pieces were quite symmetrical in general. Let's look at those. When you are a beginner, it's really comforting to know that even if your vocabulary is still very narrow, even if you would have only a few words, so I mean shapes or lines or curves or whatever you draw, you can do a lot with just a few. And that's how I started. Think about pop songs, for example. The chorus can repeat the same word again and again and again. And in the similar way, your art can repeat one thing. Your hand can get connected and your emotions can get connected with one shape only. So your vocabulary is very narrow and you are in the beginning, but you can still do a lot. Actually, I have one course that is very much based on that. One, I could say, an error in my artistic journey when I drew mostly just circles. I wanted to document that error for a course called Collage Land. And that Collage Land is filled with that kind of simple stuff. You can see what kind of world I built in there. But let's also look at those old pieces here. I have a few that are not projects of that course, but very similar. So here's one of those early pieces, and you can see that there's just circles. There are some dots of paints and then some lines that I've drawn and then circles. Even the background is circles, everything is circles, but the colors are really choosy, and I really like this idea that you get a glimpse of something, but you can't quite catch a big picture, but you can still draw something, even if it's only repeats, and still enjoy colors and produce a beautiful, I would say, pattern, like a fabric rather than an expressive image. But still, you are creating unique stuff here. Nothing's cut from the magazines. Everything is hand painted and hand drawn. Then here's another one, and this is different in the way that I've heavily used collage. technique. So again, everything is hand drawn, but it's all also collage. So I've drawn some shapes on a paper and then cut them out and then made a kind of this kind of composition. And again, it's quite modest and it's maybe a bit clumsy, but still it's all unique and hand drawn. So if you compare these two, you can see that the pattern became more like an image maybe in this. And then here I've used circles from 2011, so this is 14 years ago, and I've added some hand-drawn collage pieces and made sort of composition, an image. And then I'm also always been inspired by textiles, and in my course Collage Land I talk more about that connection that is between these kind of doodles and circles and then textiles, quilting, embroidery, knitting. For example, here I was inspired by Fair Isle knitting patterns, and I just drew a simple flower or tree and repeated that. You might think first that why create this, but you know, when you want to create collages, you also want to have lovely hand-drawn pattern papers that you can use for cutting out the shapes. And here you can see a piece from 2014, so a few years after that. So this is already an image or a design that is much more intricate, that has a different way of dealing with those basic shapes. Lots of basic shapes, lots of circles, but then you can also see some variation. So if I put these side by side, you can see that there's much more variation and content in this piece, which is about fall leaves and folk leaves is this, how I call this. An example here that is not so colorful but is full of doodles. So circles after circles. And then here's a piece about 4 years after that. So that's a drawing, black pen drawing, and you can see that how much my vocabulary has become larger if you compare these. So this one, the vocabulary was very narrow, mostly circles, some curvy lines, and here the vocabulary is much richer. Of course, you first look at what it represents, but if you omit that and you look at all kinds of shapes there, then you also see the richness. When you have this large vocabulary, then it's much easier to also draw realistic stuff, because reality is full of all kinds of visual words. When you, for the first time, find a way to create that you really enjoy. For example, for me, I found the circles really enjoyable. It felt like my hand was born to draw those circles. But you know, if you stay in that comfy corner, you can't move forward. You can't see what you can create. So it's really good to slowly expand your vocabulary, go to the uncomfortable zone and learn new words. So it's very similar to learning a new language. My mother language is Finnish, and I've struggled a lot to be able to speak in English, even like this. But I wouldn't be here to talk to you about all this if I hadn't done so. So it's really difficult to express yourself fully with a vocabulary that is too narrow. It's good to challenge yourself at times, and it's good to then decide afterward, for example after the course, what things you like to pick from that course, what things you want to pick to your vocabulary. A certain way to draw a line, maybe a certain way to change its thickness, a certain way to create a shape, a certain way to make curves, for example. It's also important that it's not passive, that you look at the reference photo and then you can copy it, but so that you can draw freely, you can memorize things, and your hand can remember how to make a certain curve, how to make a certain shape look effortless, and how to enjoy drawing them freely. When I draw something figurative or something realistic, then I get new words for my vocabulary. So it really feeds also my abstract style. And it's always important to think about not just that now I'm drawing a horse or now I'm drawing a cat. It's important to see the structure of things, because when you look at the structure, how things are structured, what kind of basic shapes could put there under them, and what kind of little things, for example with notches and curves you can change the shape, and then when you know the structures you also have a much wider vocabulary when you create freely. In my courses Animal Inkdom and Magical Inkdom we don't use reference pics, but I draw on the video and you can follow me and I explain the structure, so that this skill of drawing is not just you can draw a cat after the course, but you can realize how you can change the structure and draw different kind of animals and figures, and how you can add beautiful little details that make the figures look more and more realistic too. So many times when people think about their style and finding their style, they also think about the topics they should create. Should they draw faces, or should they paint animals or landscapes, or what kind of topics they should really create? But I don't think it's a good thing to think about. The vocabulary, the way you draw, how you handle the shapes and all this sort of abstract stuff is much more important than the topics that you create. What I've found is that when I draw something else that I want to bring in my paintings, for example, I get much more new ideas and I get new words for my vocabulary. If I limit myself too much, my vocabulary doesn't grow, and that doesn't help my style to bloom and my expression and imagination to bloom. So don't worry too much about the topic. Instead, I would encourage you to explore the adventurous side of art. So this is something that I enjoy the most. That you can just pick a few colors and then start creating. Pick one color first and then start coloring. I often use colored pencils so that I just pick one pencil that calls me the most, or one pencil that I hate most, something that causes some reaction from me. And then I just start coloring. And then slowly I start adding more and more colors. And I don't have any specific topic or any specific subject in mind. I just color and enjoy those colors. And when I've worked for a while, I get the idea, oh, there might be a sea or something, or there might be some shapes that are a bit like an animal or something. That can be a realistic, that can be an abstract piece, but it develops within time when I start coloring. Often it's really important to just start. When you think about starting as an act of growing your vocabulary or practicing those words that don't most easily come to your mind, so owning those words, it's like in a foreign language that we first use a very few words, even if we recognize more. It's the same thing in drawing. When you use a reference or when you follow a course, it's like you are reading a drawing and then you are practicing that thing. But then when you create freely, it's like you memorizing those things again. I really enjoy this free creating, and I also enjoy the discovery part, that you can discover new words accidentally, new shapes, new lines, new curves, all kinds of stuff, all kinds of effects, color combinations, all kinds of things. It's so important that we also practically create, not just think about the style and about the topic, but actually create and grow the vocabulary. So in my courses, Intuitive Coloring and Joyful Coloring, you will learn to create in that adventurous way. So I show some of the things. I have a folder here for all kinds of drawings, but you can see the rich language here. This is not a coursework, but used with similar method, such as this, flowers, but using the rich visual vocabulary. You can see the paintings in the back and see that the style is very similar because the language is similar. And here's one of the course pieces. It's a quite simple scenery, but it plays with these different kind of ways to use colored pencils. This is from the course Joyful Coloring, and Joyful Coloring is for watercolor pencils and Intuitive Coloring is for regular colored pencils, but you can use them either way. There's just some watercolor techniques in Joyful Coloring, but almost everything can be changed to regular pencils too. And this is actually fascinating, that always when you are learning new things, it can help that you transform things too. That when you practice, for example, let's say colored pencils, that then after the course you practice the similar things in paint. And that's the way you build a connection between painting and drawing, and that also strengthens your style, or should I say now, strengthens your vocabulary if you find new words. There can be some discoveries when you paint, and then you can take them to drawing. This alternating thing that you learn both draw and paint is really important. And if you look at the artist in art history, almost every painter did also draw. One language that I've definitely wanted to add my visual vocabulary is the language of flowers. I love flowers, and I know many that want to, for example, draw faces because that's their style practice. But for me, flowers has been the easiest thing to create and to practice. And I think that it speaks a lot about a person, how she or he handles the flowers. I don't mean that it's either good or bad, but how you see the flowers, it tells a lot about how your style will evolve and what direction you want to go. I have a garden and it's full of flowers, and I also create flowers in this adventurous way, so that I just start throwing some paint and then start to build flowers from there. I also have flower painting classes, many of them. Floral Freedom, which is for acrylics. And then for watercolors there are many, for example Floral Fantasies that has both watercolor and acrylics, and then Freely Grown that has both watercolors and colored pencils, so that we start with watercolors, and then when the things get smaller, like flowers have very small parts, then we change to colored pencils. When you want to add some flowery things in your vocabulary, these courses are great. And I would like you to think about this, that any art can be really flowery when it borrows their visual vocabulary from flowers. So flowery art can exist without flowers. When you draw a wide range of shapes, curves, lines, and have many ways to color, repeat, break up, and assemble them, you can produce visual stimuli on paper that makes your imagination work. And from this collaboration, art is born. This summarizes really well what this vocabulary thing is all about. It is to boost your imagination. And when your imagination runs wild, then there's no limits. And all these questions that you've been asked, that are you creating an animal or a human, or are you creating an indoor scenery or outdoor scenery, or could that a house really be a house or a palace? All these questions are actually irrelevant, because you can paint a palace that looks like a flower, or paint a flower that looks like a palace, and you can break all these limits. Well, many call this abstract zone and abstract art, but actually the art doesn't always have to be so abstract. You can still play with these. You can give hints to the viewer of the different world and make the overall image so rich that it's such a pleasure to watch, and it connects really deeply to many different people too, because it has such a wide vocabulary, such a rich expression.